this war which was to come, we see fire, the word bombardment is not used, but the way in which he described his own words were very similar to air bombardment and fire being thrown from the heavens upon the warring factions. As yet, the airplanes were not invented either. As you know, for the first time in 1905, the Wright brothers invented the very preliminary thing which he called flying machine. They've called flying machine in America. But this prophecy is before that, when even the concept of aeroplanes was not born. So I'm relating these two things. And the second part of my answer also relates to the parable of birds. So it seemed that the Christian world in future, that is in relation to Jesus' time in future, would be first of all given superiority over the rest of the world with the help of naval power, which will later on followed by the aerial power. And these will be the two major means of supremacy of the Christian world. So miracle, what greater miracle could you expect? That those miracles of Jesus which had remained unsolved for around 1900 years, even the Christian world remained totally unaware of their potential prophetic power. And Hadhrat Mirza Tahir Ahmed of Qadian interpreted them at a time when there were no outwardly signs supporting that interpretation, and yet we saw it to be fulfilled exactly as he had predicted. Thank you. Yes. Next, please.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
These are some questions that I've got from some Muslim sisters and non-Muslim brothers that I brought here with me today. How can Western women adjust to the traditions of Islam with its strict beliefs and no rights for women?
Which do what?
How can Western women adjust to traditions of Islam with the strict belief and no rights?
Please. Your question relates to women adjusting themselves to the provisions for men to have 4 wives. Is that what you said? Or did I understand you wrongly?
Yes.
That's okay. Now this is a question which has become a routine question now. Wherever I visit in the Western world, this question always follows me. But with patience, I always try to satisfy the inquirer with reference to the realities of the world. Now this question of 4 wives first has to be understood, what it means, and does it really mean what the world outside Islam understands, or does it really mean what the world within Islam understands it from it? All these aspects have to be clarified, and without which I cannot really answer your question to your satisfaction. This injunction comes in the Holy, we find in the Holy Quran in relation to a war situation where a large number of widows and orphans were created as a direct aftermath of war. Now, if these people were left to their fate in the society, they could have created moral havoc, so something needed to adjust them. Of course, in those days in Arabia, it was a custom to have slaves and slave women. And that custom was also inherited by the people of Arabia, including Muslims. But that was no answer. If Islam had remained satisfied at that traditional solution, then Islam could not have done anything new and good for the rest of the world. So it was a befitting moment for this revelation to be vouchsafed to Hadhrat Muhammad Rasulullah, which said, now, before that, I must turn to another thing. It was a custom also in Arabia that men could marry without limit, even 100 times. Those wealthy people who could afford, no limit was imposed on the number of marriages which they could conduct. That was another tradition which was inherited by the people of that time. Religious-wise, there was no limitation imposed in Judaism on the number of wives. And we know that even great prophets of Allah, known to be that some of them as the fathers of the whole prophethood, that is Abraham, had more than one wife. And what about David? 99 wives, and as yet, according to the Bible, he wanted to add to that number. So all this background must be understood to understand this injunction. When the Holy Quran says you are not permitted to marry more than 4 times, it is a limitation imposed and not a permission granted. That is the first thing which must be understood about this. For the first time, the number is confined. First time in the history of religion, the number is confined to 4 only, but with 2 conditions on either side. The Holy Quran says to do justice to these poor orphan girls and orphan boys and, of course, the widows. The best solution is for those who can afford to marry more than once, up to the limit of 4. But before the permission, the Holy Quran says, it is done with a view to do justice. And at the end of this, the Holy Quran reminds again, it is, remember this again, if you can do justice, only then you are permitted to marry more than once. But if you cannot do justice, then you must have only one wife, no more than that. Now this injunction, in the light of what I have explained to you, is not something which is of only historical importance. This injunction is of universal importance for all times to come. During every war, and this is the beauty of this verse, it is revealed in relation to a war. During every war, similar situations do erupt, sometimes suddenly after the war. They are there, but erupt in the sense that they are the man of that period, or the people of that period are suddenly confronted with a huge problem in their lap. We find that women overnumber the men in the society which is left over from war. In 1944, many of us were not born, but we know the recent history, what happened then. But in 1945, when the Second World War was over, we know what followed. In Germany alone, the women outnumbered men by such a large margin that the society had no answer what to do with them. The problem was so pressing and so serious of a nature, so serious in its nature, that once we know, I mean, this is a historical fact, someone came from Pakistan and made an advertisement in some of the German papers that he is a Muslim, he has one wife already, he would like to marry a German lady. And whoever is interested should write to the secretary of that man who was a landlord in Multan. The number of applications exceeded 70,000.